going to start from the very beginning of the parsha. So if you have your sources, it's not the first source from the beginning, because I went back to the beginning of the parak, but rather I'd like to start from pasuk tet. It's parak vav pasuk tet. Eila told Noach, Noach ish tzadik. Now we're told two things at the same time. We're told about a corrupt society, and we're told about a person who is going to be given a task to survive, which is essentially all that happens. And as a background to this, there's also something must have happened. Now, I want to be very clear to make this easy today, and that is, I want to try to figure out why what happened had happened. Look, I don't know the answer to this question. If we were watching a society in front of us devolve, or society become corrupt, or society falling apart, would we necessarily know it if that's what we were, as we were seeing it? I mean, some of you would say absolutely, and some of us perhaps would question how much awareness people would have as things are taking place. But in order to understand the antecedents, I think we need to first have a better understanding of what it is that happened. And for better or for worse, and the truth is 98% for better, but you'll see there's a 2%. We learned a lot of this as kids. We learned a lot of this. Again, I don't know how far back to go. It could be already in kindergarten. Kids learn this, and they learn the story, and they learn what people did wrong. And right there, we're going to have a little bit of a problem. Because if you're going to talk to children about this, then I think that one needs to perhaps to sanitize things a bit. Now, Rashi actually does some of that. There is some discussion regarding who Rashi's intended audience is, which means, is Rashi writing to the adult? Is Rashi writing to the child? Who is Rashi writing? Or is Rashi writing to everybody? And then people could take Rashi on different levels, which I think is more often than not the case. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, who did a lot of work on Rashi, he claimed that Rashi was speaking to children. And again, that itself is interesting in this week's parsha. Maybe we can appreciate that. But let's go to the beginning, and then I'll show you exactly what concerns me. So we're not told that much about him. I've many times have pointed out that the word tzaddik is not, if I mention the Rebbe, then I can mention Chassidus, I can mention the Baal Shem Tov. The word tzaddik here is not in the Baal Shem Tovian sense. It doesn't mean that he was an Admor. It doesn't mean that he was a tzaddik in a biblical terminology. In biblical terminology, means innocent. It is a legal term. It is not one which speaks about someone's soul. It speaks about somebody's guilt or innocence, again, in a legal sense. Which means by saying that he was innocent and only telling us that he's innocent actually is telling us a lot, because then it's saying that everyone else is not innocent. Remember, when Avraham argues and he says maybe there are 50 tzaddikim b'stom, he's not saying there are 50 Hasidic Rebbes in stone. What he's saying is that maybe there are 50 innocent people in stone. Innocent. How could the judge of the whole world, kill the innocent with the guilty? Again, it's a legal terminology. So we're told over here, Ish tzaddik tamim yabdoratav, et elokim etalech Noach. And it's interesting, he follows Elokim, Midat Hadin, he does what's right. Or, maybe even more so, he doesn't do what's wrong. Vayolad Noach shlosha banim, et Shem, et Cham, vet Yafet. And also, to be honest, we don't know anything about them. We don't know, at this point, certainly not about their innocence or their guilt. Vatishachet, and that's the first word that we're going to have to pay attention to. Vatishachet haaretz lefnei Elokim. So as much as 2 verses ago we're told that Noach walked with Elokim, et Elokim talech Noach, now we're told, Vatishachet haaretz lefnei Elokim, and there's only one problem right now, and that is that we don't know the word Vatishachet means. I would be sympathetic to say that it means became corrupt. Vatishachet haaretz lefnei Elokim. The world became corrupt, but I'm saying that right now out of a lack of an ability of saying anything more. And we're going to all see in a moment that the word corrupt is not enough. V'yimalei haaretz Hamas, and the world was filled with Hamas, which everyone right now, I'm sure, has some thoughts about. But now we actually have two words to contend with. One word is Vatishachet, and the other word is Hamas. V'yar Elokim et haaretz v'hinei nishchata, which then went back to that word. Ki hishchit kol basar et darko al haaretz. So again, I'm just, for argument's sake, I'm happy to use the word corrupt, and God sees that the land or the world has become corrupt. Ki hishchit kol basar et darko al haaretz, because all of flesh had become corrupt on earth. V'yom Elokim leNoach ketz kol basar ba lefanai ki malah haaretz Hamas, and God tells Noach that everything has been filled with Hamas. V'hineni, and here's some nice poetic justice, mashchitam et haaretz. V'hineni mashchitam et haaretz. So these two words, v'shchit, the word Hamas, are the two words that we have to figure out. And as I said, we have to figure out what they mean, and then perhaps we can go backwards a little bit, and then we could try to figure out what it is, what is the source for this? Again, what's the antecedent for this? And perhaps, again, where all of this came from. Rashi, it's in source 2, Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vatishachet, Lashon Erva va'avoda zara. Kimo pen tashchitun ki shchit kol basar. Now, again, we need to take a look at what verse it was that he directed us towards. That's in source 3. Pen tashchitun vasitim lachem pesel tmunat kol semel tavnit zachar nukeva. So what it talks about there is a warning of not becoming corrupt by virtue of making idolatry. So Rashi actually just now told us that the corruption, again, I'm using that word, the corruption over here is a corruption in terms of, again, we'll go in order, in terms of idolatry, in terms of sexuality, and we also know that there's a correlation between those two things for many, many reasons. I'm not going to pursue that anymore right now than we need to. In source number 4, it actually adds another element, but this is Midrash Agadah, they were idolaters. Using that verse that Rashi utilized. So now it adds another element, that Hamas is theft. And if you go back and look at Rashi, I'm sorry, going back and forth, if you look at Rashi back and Pasuk Yud Gimel, source 2, towards the end, Kates kol basar kol makom shetamot says nut v'avodah under musa ba'al olam. So all kinds of terrible things come to the world. V'horeget tovim v'ra'im. That once the plague comes, it strikes both the good and the bad. Kimal aretz Hamas lo nechtam zar dinam ela ala gezel. So Rashi is identifying Hamas with stealing, or robbery. So at this point we have idolatry, sexual sins, and robbery. Going back to source 4 in Midrash Agadah, it then adds another element. At the end of the second line, Davar Acher Hamas, but there's another opinion. What does Hamas mean? Shahayu Shofchei Damim, that they were guilty of murder as well. And it quotes the verse of this, Shenemar, Ma Hamas b'nei Yehuda asher shofchu dam naki ba'artzam. So it speaks about, again, the word Hamas, but connected with the spilling of blood. So it's by this point now that we talk about a corruption that has taken place. We realize that the corruption is on many different fronts. What Rashi had told us has its source in the Gemara in source 5 as well. Gemara in Sanhedrin. So what does the corruption mean? Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, Mikol Makom, Shenema Hashchata, Einu El Dvar Ervav Avodah Zarah. Again, sexual sins and idolatry. Dvar Ervav Shenema Ki Hishchit Kol Basar. So it's understanding that as the sexual sins, talking about sins of the flesh. Ertako Avodah Zarah Dichtiv Pen Tashchitun Va'asita. I'm jumping to that verse in Dvarim, which use the word pesel as well. So therefore, you see that the word is used in both of these contexts. In source number 6, the Netziv identifies that verse in Dvarim with the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. He's commenting on Dvarim. V'amar al chorban by Rishon shichet lo. But let's remember something else. Again, I want to take all these random statements and make all of this a bit clearer. Once the Netziv took us to the destruction of the first temple, there's something else that we know. And what's that? That the first temple is destroyed because of three things. So therefore, when we've seen over here strands of commentaries or midrashim, chazal, telling us that, corruption, what is corruption? And pointing us towards idolatry, towards sexual sins, towards murder. So none of that should be a surprise to us, because it's almost for us the definition, and therefore the Netziv, again, when he says Hishchit, he goes, no, that's the destruction of the first temple, and that then just ties all of these things together. In source number 7, this is someone who's very well known in halacha, much not as well known in as a commentary, and that is someone who wrote a book called the Trumat Hadeshet. Very important sefer in terms of Ashkenaz Minhagim. Here he's commenting on the golden calf. So there it says they made a pesel. Avodah Zarah is easy. By the way, all of us know that there's another thing which is there, and what's that? Shvichut Damim, because we know the whole backstory in terms of Chur, who tries to stop them. They kill Chur. So there is an element there of both murder and of idolatry. But the third thing it says then, V'kamu litzachek. So what he is doing over here is he's trying to explain what the word litzachek means. And he points out in various contexts that the word litzachek has a connotation of, I don't necessarily say a sexual sin, but of sexuality. And again, we can read this a little bit. Rashi v'yesh b'lashon shvichut damim k'dichtiv yakumu gam hanarim v'ach kan naharog chur, and Chorg was killed as well. Tzarich liyashiv tzat hamay yirich Rashi lavi raya michor v'lo samach lashon litzachek. כדסמיך לעניין גילוי עריות, לא אשכחן מפורש במקום אחר, שחטאו בגילוי עריות. ויש לומר, again, because Rashi there teases out of litzachek of gilui arayot. ויש לומר, the pashte dekra, a simple reading of the text, mashma tfei gilui arayot, points more towards the sexual sin. Mi'ashvichut damim. The lashon mitzachek ashkechan bekama duchte dekai atashmish. Of course, there's a number of places that we see the term made merry, if you will, litzachek, having connotations of sexual sins. As we find that Avimelech is looking through the window, and there we're told is that in Rivka Ishto we're told that litzachek. So we see it in that context. He then goes on, I'm going to skip a little bit to the third line, but there's another indication that it was really Gilui Arayot. Why? It says, Kishachet Amcha. Because there it says, your people have become corrupt. So therefore he's saying, but the word corruption, so therefore, God is the one who said that they became corrupt, and we see all over. Now, by the way, this is really interesting, because we kind of had a line just now that maybe part of it was easy for us, and the only part was harder for us, maybe, would have been the flood. Let's start all over again. If I would have said that there's some kind of a correlation between what happened with the golden calf and the destruction of the first temple, I would have had very little resistance to that. I would have pointed out the day that it happened was Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, right? Moshe goes up 40 days, right? He goes up around the 6th, 7th of Sivan, 40 days later, is Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. That's when Moshe comes down. That's when they're making the calf. Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, of course, is the date that later on will be the beginning of the destruction of the first temple. So I'm saying all of that's easy. Not only that, go a little bit further. We know that the first temple is destroyed because of those 3 sins. And now you move backwards to the golden calf and you say, hold it, the golden calf was not just idolatry, there was also murder, there was also a sexual outrage which took place there, which means to draw the correlation between those 2 elements, and by the way, what is actually the link that now we know that we didn't know when we started today, what's the link? It's the word lahashchit, hashchata. And that word is the one, because again, the Netziv told us, make sure when you go to the land, you're not going to do these things. He goes, that's what actually destroyed the first temple, right? That's what the warning was about. On the other hand, when God says, no, that kishichet amcha, there's corruption over there. So what is the corruption? So again, I'm just saying is that was the easy part, to draw the parallel between the golden calf with everything wrapped around it, together with the destruction of the first temple. So what did we gain today? We just did one more thing, and what was that? We were looking for the word hashchet, hashchata, because that word is used multiple times in describing the background which caused the flood to happen. So now we realize that whatever was taking place by the time of the flood has a correlation, a similarity. There's something over here connecting between what happens by destruction of the first temple, and for that matter, what happens by the golden calf. And again, all that we're pointing out then is that the use of that word, which we may not have been as sensitive to, we read the flood, we just kind of read it through, okay, everything's bad, everyone's corrupt. But again, that's my question. What does corruption mean? Now, one could be a little bit unfair, because I said, when they teach in school what it was that happened, they said, because what was the thing, like Rashi said at the end? They were guilty of stealing. And everybody knows the Yerushalmi, yes? The Yerushalmi, that's people would walk into a store and everyone would take a little bit to eat, a little bit less than a sheva pruta, so no one could be. But by the way, that's a very sophisticated interpretation of what happened. That assumes that there's a justice system, that assumes that there are judges around, there's assumed that there's decency, that there's laws. With all due respect, it sounds to me that that's not what's taking place over there at all. It sounds to me what's taking place is much more of a situation of power and might, and the strong are the ones who are in control, and they're just taking whatever it is that they want. And therefore, even though Rashi had told us along the way, there are sexual sins and there's idolatry, again, I think especially when kids are taught this, they're saying, no, the main thing is gezel. If you're a teacher in school, you can then say a very good lesson out of it, and be careful not to take something for even of very little value from anybody. That's what ended up bringing the flood, and so on and so forth. Of course, the problem with before I get to the problem, the good side of this is he said a very good lesson. The downside of this is it's totally extreme and not proportionate. It's not going to be because somebody took less than a sheva pruta, that's going to destroy the entire world. That does not really make sense. And yes, you can tell me. I can show you the Yerushalmi. I know the Yerushalmi. I know what it says. And nonetheless, if you're looking for it, it's Yerushalmi in Bava Metzia, Perek Daled, Halacha Bet. So yes, it says that there, but it seems to be a little bit stronger what we've been seen till now. Now, everything I've done till now has ignored the larger piece of evidence. Yes, and predictably, the Midrashim on what it is that Yishmael did will offer all of those possible interpretations. That he wanted to kill, that there were sexual sins, there was idolatry. They'll do the exact same thing and correct. Your intuition, first of all, your memory is good. Secondly, your intuition is good, because that's exactly what Chazal do. They say, why? Because the word tzchok also could have these things. But again, the stronger word was, and that was what we saw in the Trun Radeshin. He goes, no, let's not work on tzchok all that much. Let's go to lahashchit. That's the stronger word. And as I said, I don't have a good definition for it yet, and the word that I used was corruption. So we have corruption, and we also have Hamas. Hamas, till now, we've interpreted it as gezel, taking things that aren't theirs. But as I said, we've ignored something. To see what it is that we ignored, remember from the very beginning we started and I told you let's ignore the first couple of verses, let's go to the beginning of the parsha. Nonetheless, our favorite Archbishop of Canterbury, when he made the chapters start a little bit earlier. For us, it's the end of Bereshit as opposed to the beginning of Noach. But nonetheless, it's Perek Vav Pasuk Aleph, and let's take a look because it really is an introduction to what's happening here. By the way, completely unremarkable that when people became more numerous, there were daughters that were born to them. Yes, 50% of the time, approximately, that's what should happen. Which means, what in the world is it telling you if it's just meant to tell you something which was obvious? V'yiru b'nei ha'elohim et benot ha'adam kitavot hena. Now, I would translate b'nei ha'elohim, even though I hope you realize that just trying to figure out who's who and what's going on in this section is incredibly challenging. First of all, let's make sure we don't call this B'nai Elokim. I think that would be much more of a theological problem. The B'nai Elohim, when we call God Elohim, we're saying, what would be the best English translation of that? The Almighty. Why? Because the word El means power. So the B'nai Elohim, which means the sons of the powerful, which means that we have powerful people who are doing things we're about to see which are inappropriate. Wow. That's unique, right? As I said, that's unique. V'yiru b'nei Elohim et benot Adam. The sons of the powerful men saw the daughters of man, ki tovot hena. How should we translate tovot? I mean, it's not exactly the same thing when God looks and says, oh, ki tov, vayar Elohim ki tov. Where, I mean, that's right. Over here, ki tovot hena. Attractive, we can do that as you want. V'chu lahem nashim mikol asher bacharu, and they took for themselves women, whoever they chose. Now, what in the world do you do with that verse? Now, some of you may say, wow, that's really romantic. It's really nice. And some of you may hopefully say, no, that's not as romantic as perhaps some people think. As a matter of fact, God's response is, "V'yomer Hashem lo yudin ruchi b'adam l'adam b'shagamu basar v'yomav me'av v'esrim shana hanefilim." If enough problems with b'nei Elohim now, you have the nefilim you ba'aretz mimahem v'gam acharei chen asher yivou b'nei Elohim el benot ha'adam v'yidu lahem heim hagiburim Hashem me'olam anshe Hashem v'yar Hashem ki rabba ra'at ha'adam ba'aretz v'kol yetze machshevato libo rak kol hayom. And God sees that man's heart does bad things all the time. V'yinachem Hashem ki yasat adam ba'aretz. And God, now I don't know how many people wrote me this week. It's as if they never noticed this before. How could it be that God has second thoughts, right? I guess this is buyer's regret. This is creator's regret. God, v'yinachem Hashem ki yasat et adam. V'yitatsev el libo. That's a really interesting turn of phrase. And I don't think it's as simple as we think. First of all, yitatsev, the root etsev. Have we seen it yet in the Torah? Yeah, multiple times. We've seen it by the punishment of Eve and the punishment of Adam. The etsev til dibanim, so that's interesting. And he's also, in terms of working the ground, it's also the word etsev is used. It's used. You want me to take out the Chumash? It's used by both, which is really interesting because the word is used as a result to sin. So, which is, we're supposed to have, I'm getting carried away. It's okay, I'm telling you, I'm getting carried away. Where did the whole story begin? In the Garden of Eden. I'm willing to say that Eden and Etzev are two opposites. It's supposed to be a place of pleasure, instead it becomes a place of Etzev. Okay? If you want, I told you. If you want, I could say I'm getting carried away, but it's okay. I'm allowed to. But nonetheless, that you should notice. The other thing is v'yatatsev el libo. I know the way to read the way that everyone would read it the first time is that God mourns v'yinachem, that he ki asat adam ba'aretz. Of course, the problem there is ba'aretz. So there are midrashim that say, ba'aretz and lo b'shamayim, that maybe God should have just created things that are connected to the heavens rather than us who are made of flesh, because when made of flesh, what follows? Sins of the flesh follow. Vayitatsev el libo. So even though this is really easy, my job is to make it hard. Who's hard? A matter of fact, go back, not so far, one verse. Vayar Hashem ki rabba ra'ata adam ba'aretz v'chol yetzer machshavot libo rak holoyam. And man's heart is totally obsessed with doing things which are evil. Vayitatsev el libo. Now that's such an interesting turn of phrase now, that God has etzev because of libo, because of how man is using his heart, which means you all see what I just now did, and it wasn't complicated. It's almost staring at you when you're looking at it, because it's the previous verse and it's this verse, and that was the last lave that we were talking about, which means essentially God created us with free will, and God is disappointed that we keep making the wrong decisions. And I'm going to say it again, the use of the word where God has etzev is interesting. The other thing which is interesting is the other word which we saw over here. Vayinachem. I mean, am I the only one who sees it, or you see it also? Do you see what's in the middle of that word? Noach, right. So Noach is kind of hiding over there. God, v'nachem Hashem ki asa, but there is something which is hidden, and that is someone like Noach who does the right thing, or at least doesn't do the bad thing. And again, if you think it's my imagination, v'yom Hashem emche et ha'adam asher barati me'al panei adama me'adam ad behema ad remes v'ad ofa shemayim ki nichamti. So again, you see it there. Ki asitim v'noach matzachein. Chen also is really interesting because it's Noach inverted. V'noach matzachein b'nei Hashem. So you have this whole section of God lamenting the state of the world, that the world has become someplace which is corrupt. The reason the world is corrupt is because of man who's created with the ability of making choices, and God is lamenting the choices which man has made. Again, this idea that man is being mashchit is going to be followed up by God doing hashchata, which again, that's the poetic justice over here, that the world will become mashchit as well, and therefore essentially there are consequences to our behavior, which is really interesting because there are quote-unquote natural consequences. The reason why natural is not the best word to use, it's not really that nature, it's nature in the service of God. And at the very end, God says, I'm not going to keep on doing things like this because this is the way that man is, but that's part of, I think, a larger thought about what really changed from before and after. Having said all this, we can now move over to try to figure out what Hamas meant. Rashi told us it meant Gezel. If we go and look at source number 8, the Targum Onkelos, says that the Etmalet Ara Chatufin. Chatufin means people are grabbing things, lachtof, right? Are grabbing things. The Targum Yerushalmi, right? Itmalet arachum sin v'gozlin. So it's Hamas. So you have gezel, things are being taken. The Ibn Ezra says something which is so good, so to the point, and so correct, because all that the Ibn Ezra does differently than we did till now is that he acknowledges that we should have started by the beginning of the chapter, and he writes, Hamas begezel v'oshek v'kachat gam hanashim b'chazakah. Which means when it says the world was full of Hamas and everything became corrupt, all that he did is he went back to the beginning of the chapter of the powerful people taking the girls or taking the women. So he says it's not just that they're going to a store and each person is eating a grape. Rather, by the way, this lesson, who really worked for my wife. We go to the shuk. She won't taste a grape. She won't taste a grape. And I go to the guy, the proprietor. I said, "Could we taste a grape to see if we like them?" Oh, of course. Like she won't do it because again, this got in. She doesn't want to cause another flood. Could be that if we need rain, maybe she'll start doing it. So now on the topic of food, okay. You want a recipe? There is an argument that people were vegetarian beforehand, but by the way, years and years ago, somebody heard one of my classes. I talked something about eating meat, and he writes me and he says, "Isn't it true that in Judaism the highest level is to be vegetarian?" And he says because Adam and Eve were vegetarians before the sin. I said they were also walking around naked. Like, what's your point? Go ahead.
The point is that after the flood, they were given the concession to
Yes,
food.
yes.
So how is it that, these vegetarians supposedly didn't have the desire for meat, and all of a sudden the desire for meat is created after the flood?
Okay, we're going to leave your question, and we'll find a good time to come back to it. And I have nothing against vegetarianism. I just have a problem when people try to force it into Jewish law or theology. I find that sometimes a little interesting. I know. I Rav Kook wrote. Okay, we're not doing this. Rav Kook has a book on vegetarianism that he didn't write. He didn't write it. Rather, his son and another student, the Nazir, who were both vegetarians, they cut and pasted from some of his other works, and they put this book. But it's just like when he's talking about the topic in general terms. Rav Kook was not a vegetarian, by the way.
You're saying it's not a Rav Kook book?
I don't know. It's a pseudo. So, yeah, except for, if you want to eat olive leaves, they're a little bitter, I think. Rav Kook, in this book, one of the things that he says is that the world isn't ready for vegetarianism because the Europeans will end up valuing animals more than they do human life. Rav Kook was very depressed during World War I. Beforehand, he was much more positive in terms of the world becoming towards peace and if we can have a spiritual evolutionary process. But he was and when he saw that the world going out, I can't even imagine what he would have thought if he would have seen World War II. But some of his writings, by the way, he didn't get to write beforehand that much. When he was younger, he did. Can we not talk that much about Rav Kook? But I just say he didn't have such an easy life. He got married. His wife died, I think, within 2 years, and was left him with a baby. And then he remarried. He married her first cousin. Their fathers were twins, by the way, twin brothers. And he wrote when he was younger, and once he got into the Rabbanut, he didn't have as much time to write. During World War I, when he got stuck in Switzerland, and afterwards in London, he actually had a lot more time to write. So he's sitting and writing things there. Aval maspik. Let's get back. Let's get back. So that's why I said the Ibn Ezra is really good because he connects the Hamas with the various things and the violence. Now, of course, you're all going to say Hamas. The violence of taking is also taking women, which again, that's what the Ibn Ezra is telling you. I'm saying that's what's really interesting. The Chizkuni goes in the same direction. Hamas Gili Arayot, Shenemar Chamsi V'Shari, Hamas of the Chachamim, Hamas Hashem Shvichut Damim. So again, we got to them all over here. They're yes. Look what happens when Noach is named in source 12. V'yichil lemech shtayim u'shmonim shana u'ma'ad shana v'yilid ben v'yikrat shmo Noach lemor ze yinachamenu, again v'yinachem and so on, mima'asenu umi etzvun yadeinu min adama asher erra Hashem. So now you see the word again over there. So I'm saying don't ignore that word because that word was there with the sin. It's there when Noah comes into the world, and then it's there afterwards when God says, okay, it's time to wipe things out. All of this is not a coincidence. Now, we're going to spend as much time as we can now moving over to what I think is the place that we need to look now that we know everything, because now we know everything, and that is to go back to Perek Daled. First thing about Perek Daled, where we're up to, Pasuk Yud Tet. I mean, this is a little bit after Cain, the whole story of Cain and Hevel. That happens at the beginning of Perek Daled. And then we continue with that line because we don't have any other line yet. Shet is not born yet. That's going to happen right afterwards. So it goes on and tells the story about the various people that are being killed. being born so and so many years, and so on and so forth. Then we have something which is somewhat of an outlier. Again, I want to explain exactly what I mean by this. It's an outlier in the sense that it gives us too much information. It, which means till then it's really this person begat, begat, and it just goes down the line. And whenever you're going to have more information, you have to stop and say, why is it telling me this? The Ramban, by the way, comments on this, and he says it has to be that there's a really good reason for all of this, otherwise it doesn't make sense. And essentially, again, I'll get way ahead of myself over here. Either you're going to say that there's something really good which we're being told, or the other possibility, of course, is there's something really bad being told. But nonetheless, let's take a look. Perek, it's source 12, back in Perek, sorry, that was source 13. Back in Perek Dalet, Pasuk Yud Tet. V'yikach lo lemech shtei nashim, shem achad ada v'shem hashenit tzila. Now, my first question is that good or is that bad? Maybe that depends if you're lemech or if you're tzila or if you're adam. Maybe different people will have different attitudes to that question. And I'm sorry to immediately put a value judgment on this, asking, is this something which is good or bad? Bateled ada et yaval, hu haya avi yoshev ohel umikne. Later on, when we're told that Yaakov is in Yoshev Ohalim, some of the commentaries are going to go back and quote this verse and say, what does it mean to be a Yoshev Ohalim? It means that you are a shepherd and you go out with your flock to wherever it is that you wander, and you build tents along the way as you spend the night wherever it is that they go grazing, because there are no real boundaries that you're concerned of. You just kind of go wherever you want. Now, the thing that we should notice about this is that this is the Cain line, right? Why? Because Hevel's dead. And what this individual, Yaval, is doing is he's living Hevel's life. Okay? Anything you want to say about this psychologically, fixing, tikkun, it's in, right? You just have to notice that. I mean, that's what he's doing. And he is, again, from the line of Cain. It continues, and it says, V'shem achiv Yuval. Now that must have really been confusing. Yaval and Yuval. Hu haya avi kol tofes kinar v'ugav. And he's the first musician, which means how do you become more of a bohemian than a shepherd, right? Narei gvaot, you become a musician. So we're going to have to come back and think about this for a second. V'tzila gam hi yolda, it's Tuval Kayin, as much as, we talked about the continuation of Kayin or Hevel, here is Tuval Kayin, lotesh kol choresh nechoshet uvarzel. So guess what he went into? He went into the arms manufacturing business. So here you have somebody who's living the Hevel life, and now you have somebody who is perfecting the Kayin life in a much more, again, he's not even dealing with what Cain did. Cain, right, was a farmer. The land is cursed. Why bother working the land? But Cain becomes a murderer. So here's a guy who's making weapons. The achot tuval Cain Naamah, and his sister is Naamah. Now, the other thing that we should note is there have not been all that many women who've been named, and we just now had 3 of them in really short order. And then we have something else. Vayomer lemech lenashav adav v'tzila shma'an koli neshe lemech ha'azena imrati ki ish hargati lefitzi v'yeled lechubarti ki shivatayim yukom kayin v'lemech shivim v'sheva. I don't care what any word means over here. I'm just pointing out that this may be the first example of poetry, because he's saying something which is clearly poetic. So Could we try to unpack some of this? First of all, Chazal tell us that what Lemech did, it does not see it in a kind way. It says that, we'll read the Midrash Rabbah, we know this from Rashi as well, but look at 14. V'yikach Lemech shtei nashim, shem achad Ada v'shem b'shem Tzila, Omer V'zarya b'Rabbi Yehuda, b'shem Rabbi Yehuda bar Simon, kach hayu anshe dor hamabul osin, which means this behavior is the precursor of the generation of the flood, which means I don't have to work hard now and try to prove that in this section we're going to find behavior which is going to be the antecedent of what happens when the generation of the flood arrives. The Midrash already said this. That's not good enough for you. Rashi in source 14, Shtei Nashim, Kachir Dakan Shildora Mabul, which means we all should have known this. So when this narrative is introduced, the narrative of Lemech, and there's two Lemechs, by the way, in case you didn't catch that. You had a Lemech also in source 12 who has a son named Noach. Here you have a different Lemech. Those are two different lines. You have a Lemech from each line. So the Lemech in chapter 4 from the Kayin line, so first of all, he's a character. There's all kinds of things that you need to pay attention to. He talks of murder, by the way. He talks poetry, but his poetry is about killing. I mean, that itself is really interesting. He's the first rapper, okay? So, and by the way, there's some misogyny over here as well, just in case you needed that also, just to round things out. Why would I say that there's misogyny? Well, if you continue in the Midrash, in source 14, it says that this is what they would do. Why? Shtei nashim haya echad mehem lokach min shtayim, achad lepir v'yirivya v'achad letashmish. Zu shayta lepir v'yirivya hayta yoshevet ki'ilu almana b'chaya, v'zu shayta letashmish haya mashke kos shel akarim shelo teled, v'hi yoshevet etzlo mekushetet kizona. So, in case you didn't understand anything, see, in today's world where I really have to be careful about things that I say, but in today's world we're far more sophisticated. Those of you who don't know, my parents celebrated their 70th anniversary yesterday. So I called my father. I said, most people to get to 70 need at least 2, 3, or 4 wives. It's not that it's one wife 70 years is a lo pashut, lo pashut. You need many things to make that happen. But in today's world, people they tend they'll marry someone when they're young, have a bunch of kids with them, and then marry somebody else, inevitably younger. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm talking generalities in the world, not pointing fingers at anybody, but inevitably they'll marry somebody else who's younger. So essentially, they'll have the wife who bore the kids, and they'll have the trophy wife afterwards. And Lemech doesn't wait. He does them both at the same time. So he has his wife who has the kids. By the way, realize why he's misogynist, because his wives are only there for utility. They're not an ezer kenegdo, right? That's the thing. They're not a partner, right? It's not a section. Again, we talked about the romance before. So if I asked you, was that romantic? Well, where did the non-romantic behavior begin? It starts with Lemech. Lemech is the one who divides his needs, and let me get a wife for each one of my needs, which means when we then find later on, they took all kinds of women. Of course, they need multiple wives. They don't need all kinds of multiple needs, and the women were essentially there to serve all kinds of needs. But the thing is, there was this connotation of force, and that's exactly what Ibn Ezra was saying, is that you kidnap and you take, and you're stronger, and the powerful men did whatever it is that they did. And yeah, if only powerful men were no longer doing these things, which means that this goes right back to Lemech as the one who's being blamed. But I just want to think about Lemech and the offspring for a moment. We had one who wants to live the life of Hevel. That is really interesting in terms of the lessons and the messages that he has heard and he decides to live. He's got another brother with a name which is strangely familiar, and he decides to become our musician. So, but when you see that he's the musician, but Lemech is also one who's dealing with poetry, so therefore you realize that instead of writing anything which is romantic and so on, he's writing about his misogyny and about his murder and so on. And you know what? Again, how hard is it that we want to work today? But if I had to go find the antecedent to what takes place by the time of the flood, I'm looking right here at Lemech. Lemech is the, which means why is there all this discussion? And I also want to again be honest about something else. There are two different approaches when it comes to. There's one other person we didn't really get into, and that was Na'amah. Rashi tells you right away that who is Na'amah. So I have to remember where I left that. I left that Rashi. That Na'amah is. Rashi's in source number 21 at the very end, right before 22. Nama hi ishtol shonoach. So, see, that's really what the Ramban was going to tell us. Why do we need all this information? Is because there's something good is going to come out of it, which means just like I have the son of Lemech who decides, let me try to fix the world and become more Hevel-like, there's also a daughter who becomes someone who's very positive, and she becomes the wife of Noach, and that becomes the reason for all of this to be taught. Again, if you look at source 21 in the beginning of the Rashi, Tuval Kain, Tuval Omanot Shel Kain, Tuval Matot Shel Kain, Tuval Lashon Tavlin, Tibel v'hitkin Umanot Shel Kain, Lasod Kli Zayin Lerotzchin. That he fixed and he became Kain 2.0. If you're going to kill somebody, don't do it in such a primitive way. Let's make some weapons. Let's do this in the right way, which means if we're going to then find later on in the generation of the flood that there was murder which is taking place, and that was part of the connotation that we saw of hashchata, hishchit. One of the definitions was murder. Again, that we saw moving forward. We understood that by the golden calf, and then we understood that afterwards by the verse which the Netziv told us is connected to destruction of the first temple. And therefore we had the Gila Right Shvichatam and Avodah Zarah. So that's going right over here also to this narrative. The other thing is there are those who claim that this whole Na'amah story is a little different from the way that we just now told it. First we'll look at source 22 is Midrash Rabbah, and I'm just going to jump towards the end of it over here. Part of the thing which troubles some of the commentaries is, hold it, if he had two wives for two different purposes, how'd the other one get pregnant? Well, I'm not going to explain how they got pregnant. I know why you're laughing. But first of all, birth control doesn't always work. And just because you decide you're going to take a wife for that doesn't mean that that's what she's going to agree with, which means she still has her maternal instincts and she still wants to have a child and so on and so forth. But if she is this beautiful woman chosen for her beauty, we have every reason to believe that Na'amah as well would have been somebody who had some attractive genes to her as well. And by the way, remember the powerful men saw the Benot Adam ki tovot heina. See, I would have translated they were hot, but you would not have liked my translation. So I would have had to look for some other translation. But look at the end of source 22. The end of the midrash there. So we'll go two lines to the bottom. So that's what we saw, what Rashi said, where he got it from. Because she's such a nice woman. No, that's it. He was married to a different Na'amah. That she borrowed her brother's musical instruments and she would play the tof and bring them all towards idolatry, which means that it much more is talking about her seductive behavior, but in terms of idolatry. If you look around a little bit more, you'll find that there are those who will then say even worse things about her, is that she was a seductress generally, even going so far as to say is that she caused angels to fall. The whole concept of fallen angels at the end of source 25. Now this way that it turns it, she was so hot, that the angels were chasing her and she ran away from them. That's the way it goes in source 25. In source 26, why is she mentioned? Because the Bnei Elohim or the Nephilim, even better, the Nephilim, the fallen angels fell because of ne'ama. So essentially you have over here ways of saying, okay, why is she there? So again, we're going to go back to our famous theory of conservation of characters, and therefore, if there is this positive woman here, ne'ama, and so on, so she becomes the wife of Noach. But by the way, remember the connotation of that. That means that Cain's line lives on in all of us. Right? Even though Noach comes from the other line, Na'ama, if it's this Na'ama, she comes from Cain's side. That means that the children of Noach are children of both Cain and of Shet. So just think a little bit about the implications of that. On the other hand, if Noach's wife is some other Na'ama, again, if that's indeed her name, then this Na'ama is seen as being, again, two ways. Some see her being really positive, so I guess then you make her more like one of her brothers. The other one says really negative. There are those also claim at the end, I think of in source 23, it talks about how she may have made some of those weapons together with her brother. Right? That she was involved in the killing trade together with her brother, which means again, it sees this Nama as being negative. I'm going to say maybe one, maybe two more things to finish this up today. One is, this was the problem that some of the commentaries had. Why is there so much information here? So one way to spin it is to say there's so much information because it's going to be part of our continuation, and then somebody, even coming from the line of Cain, can turn around and make it positive. And that we should understand, because we saw an example of one of them who takes upon himself to live the life of Hevel, which itself is really interesting. On the other hand, we have this possibility that this is the continue of the Cain story, which now perfects murder, perfects all the negative traits and all the negative things, which then metastasizes in the hearts of men, all come out of this story, and that's really what it's telling us over here. And then by the time you get to that couple of verses prior to the flood, when God is looking at the heart of man and how negative this has all become, it all comes back to this story over here in terms of, again, all types of the corruption, starting with the taking of the multiple wives and taking women, and that was in the second place, going over to this place of other types of corruption, the idolatry. You know what it really is? It's the music, and it is hedonism, and it comes from Lemech as well, because Lemech he's a pleasure seeker. That's what he is. Lemech is a pleasure seeker, and that's why he needs a woman just to satisfy. He doesn't want a partner. He needs a woman to satisfy all of his various needs. And that's why that ends up later on by the flood as well. Which means the pleasure seeker Lemech is what causes a hedonistic society to emerge out. That's what they see as being the epitome of what life should be like. And then we can look at those who are making weapons on the one hand. Now you can force your will and control others with your weapons. And on the other hand, those who are in the industry of making music. So you can say, hold it, but the music is wonderful. But the question is what the music is being used for. And over here we find the music is being, the drums which are being pounded are being used for idolatry and not being used for any kind of service of God, which means that it's not so difficult to tease out of this section all the negative kind of behavior that we end up seeing as the beginning of the flood. And as I said, I want to say one last thing. You know what I find really interesting? The insistence when Noach gets on, when his children get on, it's Noach and his wife, his children and their wives, it's all the animals, 2 by 2. God doesn't say, Lemech would have had to make a choice if he was allowed on if he was allowed to get on. Lemech, come on, but it's ish v'ishto. And that term is a term which is used even by the animals. If you look at source 31, Vakimot, just pasuk Yudchet, v'kinu itach, uvatel teva ata uvanecha v'ishtecha u'neshei banecha itach u'mikol chai mikol basar shnayim mikol tavi et el teva v'achiot itach zachar u'nekeva yiyu. Again, 2 by 2 come. So I find that the 2, I know someone's going to tell me, but later on there's 7. I know. You have to remind me. I got that far in my Shtayim Mikra this week. I know. But it's this emphasis over here, and that's what I'm saying. We started with the flood. We went back a couple verses beforehand, and I said, as I said from the beginning, we asked ourselves one question. So where did all this come from? So essentially, we had a narrative which was a little bit more developed than other narratives. So we decided there must be a purpose for that, there must be a reason for that. So we started looking in that narrative. And what do we find in that narrative? We find some very interesting behavior. We also try to explore how that interesting behavior may have caused a devolution and caused this corrosion of morality and caused a society of people who were pleasure seekers and using force and using weapons and using all kinds of things to get their will, because the most important thing is the powerful person, because that's the only one who can really do this, to fulfill their own particular needs. And then when I frame it like that and I ask myself, so where did all this come from? The answer is by Lemech and his couple of wives. And then I read the verse again. God says, no, 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 two by two. Two by two. That's all that we're interested in right over here. And any questions you're going to ask me and say, but he meant, none of that interests me, because I hear God's words very loud and very clear. It's about creating a society which is a just society, following the word of God, not abusing others, not taking advantage, going back to our Yerushalmi, even taking a grape without paying for it. No, a just society. It only can work that way. Otherwise, society itself will become completely corrupt.